Hi guys, and welcome to this page on a quick start to Arnold. This page will get you started in all the basics of Arnold. We're going to be creating lights, setting shaders, and tweaking some of the settings and learning about the render view as well. So Arnold is a great renderer. It comes free with Maya. We're also teaching from ZooTools here, which you can download from our site for only $10. Now, if you're not using our tools, this will still be really helpful. We show where the settings are in the attribute editor as well. Be sure to check out our official page too. This has a lot of notes and all the menu sort of items, the regular hotkeys, as well as you can download the model for free. Hi everyone, welcome to this lesson on Arnold, and we're just going to go through some basic Arnold setup steps, put some lights in the scene, open the Arnold render view, have a bit of a play around with Arnold, look at some sampling settings to get our quality of our renders up a little bit, and it'll just give you a basic introduction into Arnold to get up and running. So the first thing that we need to do is to load Arnold. Now, if it's not here in the menus, you probably should have it off by default. On my hotkeys, Control 3 is the plugin manager, and you can get to that down here with the plugin manager. And if you type M2A, this is the Arnold plugin, and you won't have the search bar, so you just have to scroll back down in older versions of Maya. And then just make sure auto load is off. I like to tick that off, do a restart of Maya, and then every time that you use Arnold, you'll tick it on. What happens is Arnold puts a lot of extra attributes and everything through all of your nodes. It's just not generally a good idea to have it on because you may be using other renderers, other companies may be using other renderers, people you send your files to might be using V-Ray or something else. So just don't have that on by default. So once it's loaded, you can load it there, or through any of our UIs, we can load it there. It will appear, and there's our menu. You've also got a shelf, which I actually don't use that much, but you might find that shelf handy as well. So once that's done, let's just really quickly get something up and going here. I've just got a Lambert on this model here. It's a super dense ZBrush decimated sculpt, this guy here, but it's just got Lamberts on it, so it will render. Lamberts render in every renderer, so that's a good starting point. We'll just come to area lights, and I'm just going to switch on to camera, and I'm going to put this area light right above him and just go create area light there. Now that's created an area light that is 50 centimeters by 50 centimeters. This is like about 6 foot, so about 180 centimeters tall. Bring that down a little bit, and we're basically ready to start rendering there. Just a quick heads up too, because I realized I've forgotten this. To create lights in Arnold, that's the area light. That's how to create them there. I believe it's in the shelf as well if you create them there. Now what happens with Arnold is that the settings are a little bit small. You should really switch that exposure up to 12 for it to you be able to see anything. And that's how you can create kind of area lights there. You can sort of see that starting to kick in. So now let's open Arnold and the Arnold render view. Now it is sort of worth noting that most renderers now have their own render view. Just bringing that in there. We're sort of moving away from this Maya render view, which will support sort of every renderer. Usually it's best to use the render view of the renderer that you're using. So this is Arnold's render view, and all we have to do is hit go there, and we should start to see something now. What's happened is this is now interactive, and we can sort of do that. Now something that's cool about Arnold is you can actually come in here to the window and go 3D manipulation and click that on, and now you can actually zoom around in the window if your machine is fast enough, and that's pretty cool there. Now if we come back into our light manager, we might just want to make that a little bit brighter. So with that light selected, just click on the exposure and bring that up a bit. We can hold shift to make it go a bit faster. And you can see how that's working now. We can move that light around and everything will sort of interactively update quite nicely there. Now the other thing that I'll do here is I'll just create a ground plane just so that we've got something for that to look on. Now Arnold by default has got a GI bounce, one GI bounce coming up, so we don't really need to do much unless we want heaps of bounces in our lights. That's found in the render settings. Let's just go through some of the things here. Also, by default, Maya generally will render at 960 by 540 by default, which is pretty small. We hit 1:1, that will show us the size of that render. If we want the render to be bigger, let's open Shift 5, will open the render settings. It's also that icon there. Bring that up, and usually we just need to switch down to Arnold to get its settings. So here we go, there's all the Arnold settings. Usually I'll put half precision on. That just means that when you render out the images, they're not so large. We are rendering at a 16-bit color with half precision on. We can scroll down. I don't worry too much about these settings just for starters. There's our presets of our size of our frame. So if we're wanting like, full YouTube HD, that's 1080p, so that's HD 1080. If we click that there, you can see that it's sort of updating and becoming a much bigger render window. Now, often when we're testing, we don't want to be rendering that big, so we can go View, Test Resolution, and render that at half res. Anytime you move that window, just hit the 1:1. That is actually the size of the window. Now I can navigate because I've got that on. Now when you click things on Arnold, it's pretty cool. It actually is just selecting your geometry. So you can do that there and click on different things in the window. So this is really cool. I believe in the newer versions of Maya, all the renderers will start to move into the viewport, so you won't actually even have to open this window. So keep an eye out for that in 2019. What else have we got? Couple of tricks about this render view is that if we go render save UI threads, I usually will put that up to 3. Now it depends on your computer. My machine has 16 threads, and you can sort of see that usually by opening up the task manager, which is Control Alt and Delete, and then task manager, and then you come across to performance here, and you'll be able to see how many threads you have on your PC there. If you are on Windows, on OS X, you'll have to go through the activity monitor, and it's a little bit different, but I've got 16 threads. So what this means is to keep Maya updated good, we sort of like leave 3 of these threads free so that we don't render on them. And that means that Maya keeps updated and it's a bit more interactive. If we don't have any of those threads set to none, what can happen is Maya can get a little bit chuggy in your viewport. But if you're on a laptop or something and you just don't have many threads, then that's just something that you'll have to deal with. You can see when it's really starting to render, they all go full. Interestingly, we're saving the threads, but they're still going full, so I don't pay too much attention to that. It definitely does give us a more of an interactive sort of a feel to our renders. A couple other things to get to know, that's really it. The test resolution there, the 3D manipulation, which I don't use all the time, by the way, is that one. And then this is our stop and start. So if we're starting our render, that will get it going. If it's stopped there, it's obviously not going to render anymore. It's just stopped. The last thing that's really important, there's refresh there. The last thing that's really important to remember for Arnold is that update full scene. Sometimes what can happen in Arnold is you're updating your lights and stuff and it just doesn't seem to be working, like it's not updating. This is like a force update, Control U is a really good one to remember for Arnold if you're coming from other renderers. It just force updates your scene so that it sort of gets everything working. Now, when I'm going through all my light presets and things like that down here in the light presets, they sometimes don't update particularly well in Arnold, and so I'm sort of constantly coming in and clicking update full scene, and I imagine that will get better and better as time sort of goes by. So that's just a nice little sneaky one there for Arnold. And since we are using the Zoo Light Manager in this tutorial and the Shader Manager to teach, I thought I'd just add this little video here to show you where all the attributes go on the actual Arnold light. So we're not actually changing anything that's not in Vanilla Maya already. If you save out this file, it will load on any computer, even without Zoo Tools. This is the attribute positions for the light, the area light in the attribute editor. So you can check that out here. I think the only thing that's really missing in Arnold is the light visibility. So now we'll have a look at the AI standard surface and show you where the attributes match in the attribute editor as well to the Zoo Shader Manager. This is all pretty straightforward stuff here. Everything in the AI standard surface matches pretty well. I think the only thing that's a little bit out in regards to the shader is that the clear coat color right here just has a little bit of trouble, this guy, when you change the color in comparison to the other renderers, so it likes to be white. So there you go, that's the Zoo Shader Manager and attributes there. Now, the next thing is, if we are to get this rendering, is that Arnold works with samples, and you'll see that the dots here in this default render don't really go away. So if we come back to area lights, just select that light there, and I'm just going to boost that intensity quite a lot. What happens is it sort of finishes, and we've got quite a noisy render by default. Now, this is the important thing to see down here, is we've got this sort of 3, 2, 2, 2, 2. This is our samples. This is the quality of our render. We've also got how long that render took to render, so it's currently taking only 1 second, which is pretty cool, and the size there. So when you hit render, it will show you the time when the render's finished. That's another good way of knowing when Arnold's actually finished. Sometimes it'd be hard to see, is when you can actually see the time there. Now, these guys here, to get your quality up, are found up in the render settings again, Shift 5, and we can come across into here, and these numbers here, 3, 2, 2, 2, 2, they do correspond with these guys down there. So 3, 2, 2, 2, that's all your sample settings. Now, a very easy no-brainer kind of thing to do is just to switch up the camera AA samples higher. So if we were to go up something like 6, The render is going to take a lot longer now, but we will start to see a much more quality render. We're going to have a lot less noise in our shadows and things like that. So that's just a good no-brainer to use. Now, the higher that goes, you will eventually get a good render at the expense of time. So we're now up around 7 seconds to complete this fairly simple render. Now, if I'm to switch it down, it can be a good idea, instead of doing the AA samples, which is actually upping everything in the scene and it can become quite slow, sometimes it's better to actually just do each one at a time. So usually in this scene here, we do not have any glass. So anything that's see-through, that's transmission. So switch that off. We do not have any subsurface scattering, that's like skin or wax shaders. Marble has a little bit of SS in it too. You'll know if you've switched it on, it's in your shader. Volume is like fog or clouds or things like that, so you can switch that off too. So generally you can switch all those off and you'll see them changing down here. Now what we want to do is we want to up some of these guys. Now we really don't have any reflections yet on this object here. I haven't put a shader, this is a Lambert, so we could even switch that down, but I'll leave that on because we will put some specular into the shader in a second. But on the diffuse here, this is probably one that we can up straight away. So you can put that up to 3 and then see how long that takes to render. Let's just let it go. That's taking 2 seconds. Okay, so you can see that it's sort of getting a little bit better quality, but we've still got a lot of this sort of problems in here. Now I can go up again to 4 and that should get a little bit better again, but usually the shadow's got to do with something else. So I'll show you that too. So oftentimes I'll up that diffuse to 3 or 4 as a sort of good starting point. We could start at 3 there. Now what I want to do is I'm still getting this annoying sort of a noise in the shadow that's bugging me. So what I want to show you guys is in Arnold, and this is sort of different from other renderers, Arnold is very big on one setting on the lights. So on the lights themselves, it's a good idea to start with a sample setting that's up higher than 1. And this will depend on your light. If your light's really small, it's got a very sharp shadow, it's not going to matter so much. But if it's a big area light, this is quite a large area light, good idea to come in, select your light, I'll do that again, come across to the shape node, come down to the sample setting, and put that at 3 or 4. I think 4 can be a good one. We'll just let that render a little bit and let that finish. And you can see that that almost just putting that to 3 has almost completely made that look better. So it depends on the light, how big it is and things like that. Put that samples up to 3 or 4. I might even make it at some stage when you create the lights that it automatically sets that for you. That is a really hidden one in Arnold. And you can see we're getting, you know, a 5-second render that's looking very clean there. So upping the diffuse samples there. Now, a lot of people explain this and I will explain it myself at some stage, but we're not going to get too deep into this. But that is diffuse shading. That is your reflectivity of your specular. So reflections and specular highlights. That is overall including anti-aliasing, which is the edging of your shaders and textures and things like that. So that one's a big one too. But you can see we've kept our samples pretty low, we've got a very fast render, and we're getting good quality out of this in Arnold, remembering that setting on all your lights there. So every area light and your IBLs as well, I believe you should change that. And depending on how much shadowing you have on your directional lights as well, you will want to change that as well. So let's now just put a quick shader on this, and we're just going to do some very basic shading stuff here. Now all the main shaders, close that window now, all the main shaders in Arnold are the AI Surface Standard. So that's this guy. If you open up the shader manager in ZooTools, AI Surface Standard is actually just doing exactly the same as if you went right click and then come down to Assign New Material, come over here and we've got this massive list of stuff. Come into Arnold Shaders and then the AI Surface Standard, the AI Standard Surface. Click on that guy and we have assigned a shader there, and you can see it's changing here. It's quite a light kind of a color. Now instead of doing that, I'm just going to undo. Use the shader manager, and what this does is it calibrates to an exactly 50% color with no specular at all on it. And what we just have to do is I'm going to do the exact same process. We just load that up, come into this guy and just hit create. That's as easy as it is. It's now selected the shader for you, so we've got access to all the different stuff here. To change the color would be here. Why don't you change that to a red dragon, and we've now got a red dragon. Okay, so very, very easy to do that. If you want to reset the preset, you can select this and then reset that, and that has actually changed it back to the default, which is this. And we've also got presets here. So with that shader now selected, if we do have it selected, you can go there. A little tip on my hotkeys is Control Shift and N will actually select the shader and drop the selection of the object. So we've got the shader selected now. Now we can actually look at these presets and just start going through those guys there and tabbing down. Now, don't pay too much attention to these presets at the moment. They're pretty basic, and I'll switch this over to a proper system at some stage. But we can see that we've got a lot of different shader types there, and that is just changing these numbers in here. So what I've done with the shader manager is I've simplified the shaders out, so it's the sort of the 95% of stuff that you need to know is here in this window. And if we're just to build a shader manually, I'm going to go back to the matte gray and spec weight. This is our reflection on this. Now that's made like a plastic with a very shiny surface, so that's the default. Everything other than metals is usually about 1.5 for simplicity's sake. Water is 1.3, crystal is 2, so there's a bit of variation, but 1.5 we're going to be pretty much okay for everything that's not a metal. And our roughness is just how rough that sort of guy there goes. So if we put this up to something like 0.3, it's just roughening out that, so it's just a bit softer and blurrier. So up to 0.5, you can see that's looking like a very rough kind of a plastic. Now we can change that color to whatever we want, and I will change this over to the Maya color pickers at some stage, but more of a black plastic, black rough plastic there, or we could change it to, you know, a blue plastic. So that's how you make plastics. Now if you want to make metals usually you bring that down to 0, and then we bring the IOR up. And it depends how shiny you want your metal to be, but if you want it to be, I usually start at about 4 for a metal. You can see that's going metally. And then right up to 20 will be very, very reflective. So super reflective, sort of chrome ball would be up around 20 like a mirror. And if we want it to be very shiny mirror ball, we'd go put that roughness to 0. Okay, now we've only got one light in this scene. That's why it's not reflecting anything. We've got a black world. Put a couple of IBLs in there. You will see the reflection much better. So metals just go up and switch your diffuse color to black. Now, if you want to make golds and stuff like that, usually you want to tint that color a sort of like an orangey color. Now, a lot of people go gold, and even I did in the presets, but a gold color is much more sort of like yellowy oranges that's sort of in the mid saturations. Just go okay, and you can see that we've switched that over to gold. So that was really easy, wasn't it? And if we want a rougher gold, then we just put that up to, you know, to 0.5, and we've got much more of a rough gold. So that's metals and things like that. Now, if I wanted to make like a Mustang car color, just going through shaders really quickly, come into here, and we've got this sort of like very red metal base there, and I might even bring that down to 0.4, something like that. We've got this like very metally kind of red color there, like you might have on a car shader. If we want like this glass polish over the top, this guy here, these 4 digits here are exactly the same as these guys there. In fact, we could just transfer all this to there, except for Arnold doesn't handle the clear coat color very well, unlike other renderers. This will only ever go white, but in other renderers, this is identical to this. Now this is the clear coat polish, that's why I've given it clear coat there. So just really quickly, if we put that on, we've got a clear coat of 1.5, 1.5 being glass. And the clear coat specular is very shiny, being, you know, no roughness. We could even put that at 0.1 just to give it a bit more of a realistic feel. Now we've got a metal base with a glass polish on top. So this is really used only for glass polish. If you want to keep it simple, just keep to those settings and switch it off and only on if you ever want a glass polish on top of your shaders, and you've pretty much got a long way towards that there. Spec weight is just whether it's on or not, and same with that one. So we just switch it off completely, switch that to 0, switch the specular reflection off, and we're just going to have a black object until we bring that back to be like a 50% gray, and then we'll be back in towards that sort of starting point there. So a little bit of stuff, guys. It's probably not a good idea to have that gray on. If you do have metals, you just switch that down to black, and that's a good introduction to shaders there. There you go, guys. You can use these little presets. They're not particularly amazing yet, but you can use those just to get a bit of an idea for different sort of shader types, and that will well and truly get you started in Arnold. All right, hi everyone, and we're going to get started here and render this guy out nicely in Arnold from start to finish. So let's get started here, and we'll load Arnold. I don't have this Arnold loaded by default. The auto loader is off, so we're going to load it up. There it goes. We've got Arnold loaded now there. So we can come up and create a light just quickly. Might as well while we're here. Camera, create from the camera position. So we'll just zoom in quite closely here and create a light there. And I'm just going to position this. I have done this before, so I'm sort of going to roughly get this in the right position here. Something like this. Let's go to the front view. Something there, and we're going to come in and just make that slightly smaller at 40 rather than 50 centimeters by 50 centimeters. So it's 40 centimeters by 40 centimeters. So now that that's been created, there's not a lot that we need to do in Arnold other than create a camera, but we could just, for instance, open the render view now and hit play, and we should be getting something out of that. Just wait for it to load. It is a very heavy mesh there. Okay, so we've got something rendering here. Just make this a little bit smaller. And 540 by 540 is not a bad place to be, but let's just set up the camera here. So what we're going to do is we'll go Shift K for camera on my hotkeys, and we'll drag that in and zoom back a little bit. Now, what we can do here is on the camera, right click, and we'll go 1080p. So that will kick in there. I've got Arnold rendering, so I'm just pausing that by hitting the stop button so that it stops. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to K for camera, selects the camera, and we go to the focal length and then type in 80. So 80 will just make that a bit flatter. It's good for portrait lenses generally, and we can frame this guy by clicking on that little guy there and just sort of put it roughly in the center of that framing there. Without rotating the camera at all, will give us a good sort of starting point. So now that that's done, you can bookmark the camera if you want to. What that means is if we move around a little bit, we can just right click and get back to that. We've also got in the render view, we're now rendering from camera 1. So we should do that, switch to that camera and then hit play. Now, a couple of things that I like to do here is in the test resolution, let's make that 50%. So it's just rendering quite small. Next thing that I'd like to do is we can switch on the 3D manipulation, but we don't really need to move the camera. So I'm going to leave that off. Let's have a look at the save UI threads is on 3, so I could probably switch that back to 2 or something like that. That just means that I'm using 14 threads out of my 16 to render here, leaving a couple free for Maya so that it doesn't get too chuggy. So now that we're there, let's come in and select the light, and we'll open up the light manager, and it will default to Arnold. And we can just come into the area light now and just boost up the intensity of that. Now, I've done this before, so I know the sort of intensity value that I'm after. I'm going to hold down Shift to go a bit faster, and it is about that. It's about 30300 is the value that I'm after. Now, this gets a little bit bright because what we've got going on here in Arnold is we've got these Lambert shaders, and the Lambert shaders mean that this is a little bit brighter than gray. And it's not a 50% gray, it's actually quite a bright sort of color, like close to a whitish gray. That's kind of a good starting point. Now, we're pretty close to a nice looking render there already without touching anything. So Arnold works pretty nicely without setting a lot of render settings. But we want to do a few more things here. One of those is we really should get some 50% gray shaders on this. So I'm just going to put that over here, and we're going to sort of look at how we can assign some shaders very quickly. So by default, this has got Lambert shaders on it. Hit Control-Shift-N, that will select the shader that's attached to that object, and it is just the Lambert. So we come in and create and manage shaders. I'm just going to create a dragon skin here. So I'm going to call it dragon skin, and I'm going to select the dragon, make sure the dragon skin is actually selected, and then just go create. Now that's assigning an AI standard surface to the dragon skin, and it's going a little bit darker, which is what we want. This is actually truly a 50% gray in sRGB. So if you're creating a texture in Photoshop and set it to 50% gray, this is the gray that you would get. Now you'll notice the teeth are still a little bit lighter with the Lambert, so we can select the skin here, and I want to include the teeth in this shader, and we can just hit transfer. So what that means is we've now assigned the dragon skin also to the teeth there. Now we can create the background as well, so I'm going to give this a name BG for background, and we can just go create, and that will assign the same essential attributes, but we've now created a new shader called BG for background. And we've got the eyes left over here, right there. They're quite light gray. So I select just a big box around there and then deselect these two things. There's not that many objects in this scene. And we want to call this one Dragon Eyes. So create that as well. So we've created 3 shaders in this scene now in order to get that. And you can sort of see that the light sort of has darkened because of the shader. So a lighting is really dependent on the shader sort of information there. So it's gone a little bit darker. Now, it's crowding a bit of the top of the frame here. It looks fine here in this view, but once we've got that shadow there and the lighting kind of nice, we do want to sort of readjust and get that framing a little bit better. We can make another bookmark. And we're really pretty much done, except that I would like to bring a lot more detail out of this face here. So let's have a look at some shader information here, getting better stuff out of the face. And you'll probably see that some of these default settings in Arnold are getting a bit noisy as well, but I think I'm pretty happy with that as a starting point. There is a bit of noise, I can see it there, but we're still just wanting to get a little bit more out of this shader before we tweak the render settings. So what I want to do is select the skin shaded there and bring it in. We can bring it in there. Now, this doesn't change because it's only bringing in the shader information. The name is kind of separate. So if we wanted to bring in the name as well, we could just click on that guy. It's now changed to dragon skin, but it's sort of irrelevant. We don't need to touch that anymore. So this is the settings, just a 50% gray shader. And what we want to do is we want to switch on the spec weight. So the specular weight will make this surface shiny, and you can see that kicking in there. But it's a little bit clear, and it's clear because it's not rough at all. So we can go 0.55 here, and that will make it a little bit rougher. Now Arnold's shader compared to some of the other renderers is rougher than normal, so it is actually blurrier than some of the other renderers. So you could actually switch down this value a little bit here, but I'm going to keep it the same as the demos that I'm doing for the other renderers. So we've got that sort of coming through, and we can see a little bit of shininess happening, and this is fairly realistic. This is like a plastic that's quite rough. Now if we want to intensify that, what happened was when I was sculpting this, I was sculpting it in ZBrush, and it's got like a blin or a matte cap on it, and it's just a little bit shinier than this. Even though it's not really realistic to bring this sort of skin into a metal zone, we can up the IOR to make this shinier. So to bring this up to something like 20, we'd be making this very, very shiny, almost like a very rough chrome, full metal mirror kind of reflective sort of an object. And that's getting up too high. But I just wanted to show you that because that's sort of exaggerating what we're about to do here. And we're just going to boost it a little bit, like to 1.8, which is lifting it up a little bit. Technically, the skin specular should be around 1.3, that's sort of water reflectivity. But by boosting it here a little bit, it is a sculpt. It's not necessarily super realistic. We can sort of bend the laws of gravity or realism a little bit here. So now that that's kicked in a little bit, we've got a nice sheen to that. That's looking pretty good. And I thought I'd just show you this too. So what we can do is we can switch on the clear coat as well and double the shininess of this without having to crank our IOR. This is a little trick. It's a bit of a fake. It's not really the realest thing in the world, but we can just double that up to 1.8, and we've now kind of made that twice as shiny. So I'm going to do something very subtle here. I did do this when I was playing around with it. So I thought I'd show you this, is we can switch this down so that it's 0.4, so it's quite a bit shinier, and you can see that's getting a lot shinier there, but that's too much. And I want to really bring this down, and it just so happens that the clear coat weight, we can really crank this down even to 0.05 and very low levels. Now this is very subtle, you'll have to A/B it to really see the difference, but we just got a little bit more kick and a little bit tiny shine on the skin, and it's a bit of a fake and it's really subtle, so you probably don't need that, but I like to put that on that one there. And I'm going to lift that up a little bit too. I think that's just a better, and I've got 3 camera bookmarks on this. Anyway, that's a nice sort of a skin tone there, and you can see that the shininess is really giving us a lot more, elevating the sort of the surface and letting us know a little bit more information about what's happening in that surface and giving us a bit more cool stuff to look at. So now that we're there, we can put a shader on this eye. So let's have a look at how to do this. Now, what I like to do with this eye is if we hold down the backslash key. Now the backslash key is underneath the backspace key. So if you hold that down like the Alt key and then use your right click, you can zoom in just like it was the Alt key. I'm going to switch back on the shaded mode and deselect that. And we've got a little bit of clipping plane stuff happening here. This will not affect rendering. Rendering does not get affected by clipping planes, but just in the viewport, we can go back to a medium level clipping plane. I usually do that for most scenes, by the way. That's this 0.9 to 5000 works pretty well. Let's clean that up. But you'll see that we just zoomed in there, but the camera hasn't changed. That is because we're in a kind of a special mode of the camera here that's doing a 2D zoom in on the image. So if we hit backslash, we can now toggle between the zoomed in mode and the back mode. It's kind of like doing a 2D zoom in on Photoshop 2D file. It's not actually moving the camera at all. Now what we can do is we can hit K for camera on my hotkeys, and that will select the camera. And then we'll come in and right down here onto display options, we can look here and find that the backslash toggle is actually just toggling this checkbox on and off. And there's another checkbox here, which is render, pan, and zoom. So if we bring this back in again and we click that on, we're now zoomed in and we can see that nicely, and we're checking what the render looks like from close up. So I'm just going to move that over there. Now we can select the eye quite easily just by clicking on it. And I'm going to bring the shader manager over here just in a bit of a different way, and we can start to tweak this eye. Now to bring it in, we hit all that, just pulls all the values in of that shader in there. Now remembering, if you want to see what the name is, you can bring that into, but it's really irrelevant. We want to make that eye a little bit darker. It's quite a bit darker, so we're going to bring that right down, and that's going to make it quite dark, like this devil eye or something like that. But that's a little bit boring, so we want to bring a bit of shine into that eye. So we just switch the specular on, not to 14, just to 1, and that's going to really give a clear reflection of the square light that we're lighting with. Now that's not too great, so I just want to blur that a little bit by making it rougher, and we'll roughen that up to about 0.4, and that can really blur that out. Now I'm matching the values of the other renderers, but in Arnold you could probably go to 0.3 or something a little bit lower than that, so that just means that this gets a little bit sharper. But 0.3, or let's just go with 0.35. Arnold does roughen roughness up a little bit more than the other renderers. So now that we're here, we might want to make that a little bit shinier. Now, if we were to boost that to say 4, we're starting to get into metal sort of territory, and it's starting to feel like a little bit of a ball bearing, too much reflectivity. But I thought I'd just show you that because I am again going to just boost that to 1.8, and this is sort of matching what's happening in ZBrush a little bit. Even though ZBrush is not realistic, this is not realistic sort of values, where we just want to sort of retain a little bit of that information that was in the sculpt. We don't have textures on this, so we don't have this sort of nice ability to bring out these forms. So we're just sort of exaggerating it a little bit. So we're putting that to 1.8. We'll just boost that reflection a little bit, not too much, but just enough so that we can see it. And if we hit the backslash now, you can go back and you'll see that there's a tiny little nice white highlight in on that eye, and it looks quite cool. So we're practically done with this image. The last thing that we should be doing is just tweaking our render settings. So let's have a look at that. We just go Shift 5. Now ordinarily Arnold is quite noisy, but this is quite a dark render, so it's quite forgiving here. So usually what I'll do is definitely we don't have any transmission. That's like glass and see-through objects. We don't have any subsurface on this. This is for skin. Even though we're using skin now, we haven't switched subsurface on, and wax and things like that. Volume is like clouds and fog, and we don't have any clouds and fog, so we switch that off. And usually what I'll do on most renders is I'll increase the diffuse at least 1 value, but this is actually looking not too bad. There's a bit of noise here, but it's actually pretty good at these kind of basic levels here. So usually I would increase definitely that one and that one, so to 4 and 3 or something like that, and that would get rid of a little bit of the noise here. But this is actually looking quite good already because it's kind of a dark render. But there's one thing that I'd like to do, and that is to select the light in Arnold, and there is a bit of noise down here. So we'll just up that samples to 3 or 4, and that will start to get rid of this noisy area down there. It should do a pretty good job, and you can see that's looking to my eye pretty good. Now we're rendering at half res, not full res here, so we do need to check out what this looks like at the full resolution. So to do that, we can just come into view and test that resolution at 100%. Now we're rendering at 100%, and I can't quite fit this into this monitor, but this screen grab, but I'm going to bring that out. It is rendering in the background, and we'll just wait for that to finish. Now you can see when it's finished, when the rendering actually turns to a time there, and it can be a little bit hard, but I can see that there's definitely some anti-aliasing along there that's slowly getting fixed, and we'll just wait for that to finish to see the quality of that render. And we've finished that render. That is rendered at 36 seconds, so it's not too bad for a CPU renderer. Pretty good, and we've got a fairly clean render there by my standards. It will be a little bit hard to see this on YouTube, but you can sort of like go around and see that that is 1:1. That is the correct resolution. So we've got a really nice render coming out of Arnold, and pretty easy to set that up. Of course, I'm placing the light in the right place that I've done in the setup. Just wanted this to be more of a technical demo to get you sort of up and running, to show you that it's possible to get nice renders out. There you go, that's the settings I used on this scene. I hope you guys enjoyed.